Hello, this is Varun. Welcome back to another video episode. And we are almost there. This is the last piece of the puzzle before you put your precious music out to the audience to listen to. And we are going to talk about mastering your music. Almost 7 out of 10 clients who visit my studio to record music have this question: what exactly is mastering? What happens in this process? So this video, I hope, brings you the clarity that you need to understand what happens in a mastering process. As I said before, mastering is the final step that happens in a music production process. And the point of mastering is to optimize your files to playback across all media platforms. So one of the significant things that you see once you get your stereo mixes, after the mixing is done, the engineer gives you a stereo file, and then you take that and you can't upload it directly to a music distribution platform to get your audience to listen to. One of the things that you'll end up noticing is your mixes often sounds a lot quieter. So if you put it on your favorite player and you stack them against the other commercial releases, you'll notice that your song sounds very quiet compared to all the other commercial releases out there. So mastering, the first thing that you'll notice is it increases loudness of your overall track. So in a way, you can say that mastering is a final step that brings your track up and optimizes it so that it can be played alongside other commercially released songs and your track will sound good. Now, of course, there are certain other things that happens in a mastering process too. It's just not about loudness factor. Now, one of the things that you can ask me at this point is, if it's just about loudness, why are we not doing it in the mixing stage? So the work of a mixing engineer is to micromanage a recorded session. So which means a mixing engineer processes every single element of the track, whether it's a kick drum, the snare drum, the hi-hats, the toms, the overheads, the room mics, the guitar mics individually, the vocals, the keyboard, all of them are individually processed using EQ, compression, saturation, reverbs, delays, multiband stuff, a lot of things that goes into a mixing process, which we have discussed in the previous video. If you have not watched it, then I highly recommend checking that out, just to help you understand what are the plugins that you actually need to get through a track and successfully mix it yourself. So in a mastering stage, the mastering engineer now looks at the overall stereo file, which means the mastering engineer cannot go back and fix individual elements of a song. So the mastering engineer uses very similar plugins that was used in the mixing stage. Very similar ones, except a couple of them. First one being an EQ again. But this time, EQ is applied to the overall track, the overall low end tightening up, the overall high end in case if it's really harsh, or if it's not harsh enough, then try and bring it up a little bit. The overall mid frequencies, is it really giving you that fullness or the body that you need in the track, or is it lacking something, and then compressing the overall mix. Compression is the next plugin that ends up getting used on a mastering session. And thirdly, stereo widening. A lot of people are using stereo widening plugins these days because they want their mixes to sound really wide and big and spread out. So stereo widening plugin basically divides your track's frequency range, where it focuses the low frequencies towards the center and the higher frequencies are slightly pushed to the sides. And then you can control whether you want the higher frequencies to be spread out more or you want them to be slightly contained. So stereo widening kind of tries and helps you in that step. People can also achieve a very similar result using something called a mid-side EQ. So instead of using a traditional EQ plugin, you can use a mid-side EQ wherein the mid portion of your track gets processed separately, and the ones that are panned to the side, the elements that are panned to the sides, the left and right of your speaker, gets processed differently. So which means you could try and EQ the stuff that's in the middle, which is your kick, your bass, your vocals separately, and you can process this, especially EQ, your keyboards, your guitars, your reverbs and delays that are spread out very differently. So that gives you an illusion that the track sounds a bit wider than it is. Lastly, we're looking at limiting. Limiting is a process where you push the volume of your song as loud as it can get and not let it distort or clip. So limiting sets a threshold, sets an out limit, a ceiling limit, by saying you cannot go beyond this level. And when you lower the threshold and when you keep bringing it down, you see that the track starts reducing gain. It starts pulling down when it hits that limit, the out ceiling limit that you've set on your plugins. All these plugins are very much available within your DAW. Most DAWs will provide you these plugins. So you don't ideally need an external third-party plugin to get through this process. However, there are lots of third-party plugins which does a tremendous job, especially meant to be used during the mastering stage. Now, one of the most popular one has to be the iZotope Ozone Advanced plugin. You can check it out. It's a mastering suite which allows you to completely import your track into a new session, load an instance of iZotope 9, and you will be able to get through your masters with all these different processes I mentioned. And it also has some additional things that helps you in your mastering process, and that's worth noting. Apart from using iZotope to master your track, there are also online platforms such as Lander, a website that you can upload your track. It uses artificial intelligence technology to understand and analyze your track and figure out what kind of a master would suit your track best, and it masters accordingly, and then you can pay for it and download the files. Having said that, I personally am still a huge believer of sending your tracks to a mastering engineer. I prefer working on the mixes in the studio, and quite often at the Red Music Box, I send out my tracks abroad for mastering, and I work with specific engineers who I trust that they will do a phenomenal job when it comes to mastering their track. And these are highly qualified industry professional mastering engineers who have been doing this for years for really big, well-known international bands. So that's usually the people that I work with when you step into Red Music Box. Now, when it comes to working on your mastering session, in case you want to give this a shot and try to do this yourself, remember, let me highlight the phrase again, less is more. You really don't want to push your EQ, compression, your limiters, your stereo widening, any of these things, because it's not just affecting an individual element of the track, but it affects the overall song. So less is more. Even a dB, even half a dB sometimes can make a massive difference. So be very careful when you're using these plugins in your mastering session, in case you're trying to do this yourself at home. Given how everything has moved digital these days, one of the best ways you can measure the loudness of your track would be to use the LUFS meter, which is available. I use Logic Pro for most part of my work, and LUFS meter is available within your DAW. You don't have to purchase a third-party software for it. So LUFS meter seems to be the more accurate way of measuring the integrated loudness of your track. Now, there are so many online platforms to distribute your music and get your music played through. There is Spotify, there's Apple Music, there is Amazon Prime Music, there's YouTube Music. There's so many different platforms, and each of them use their own loudness limit that they allow on their platform. This is to make sure that when you play a song, you're not constantly reaching out to the volume knob, trying to crank up or bring the volume down because the levels are so uneven. So what happens is, if you push a track of yours on a certain platform whose loudness is way below yours, then your track will automatically be adjusted to play back at the loudness threshold that they follow. So which means it's better when you're sending your tracks to a mastering engineer to inform him or her that what are the certain platforms that you may want to get your music out on. They will give you mastered tracks which are meant to go out on digital streaming platforms. For example, you can now see on the chart that is displayed on the screen right now, Spotify uses -13 to -15 LUFS range, whereas Apple Music uses -16, and Apple Podcast and Amazon Music, each of them have their own LUFS levels that are acceptable on their platform. So what does this mean? Does this mean that you've got to get your track mastered for each of these platforms separately? Not really. I send the track to my mastering engineers that I work with, and they will send me back a single stereo mastered file, which is optimized to be played back across most online streaming platforms. Another thing that may be worth noting is how our ears behave when we're listening to music or anything for that matter. It would be worth checking out the Fletcher Munson curve. To simplify it, what exactly this curve means, if you're too lazy to go and read up, our ears perceive loudness very differently at different volume levels. So which means when you're listening to your song at a very soft level, you don't perceive the low and high frequencies the same way as you perceive when you're listening to a music at a louder level. You'll suddenly feel the lows and the highs have been bumped up. Now, this is what is known as a perceived loudness, and it's not the actual loudness. So a human hearing is designed to function that way. Now, let's look at some of the examples of how a mixed and a master track sounds. I hope this video helped you understand what exactly mastering does, and that you are able to now, if not master your music yourself, which requires years and years of experience, you're at least able to judge a good master when you send your tracks for mastering, and you know what exactly is happening to your songs when you're sending it. Thank you so much for staying with me through this video series. In case you have not watched any of the previous ones, I definitely highly recommend please go and check out all the 8 videos once again, and you will be equipped with practical steps for a good song, right from songwriting stages all the way to the mastering stage. If you've benefited from this video, and if you've learned certain things, and if there are things that you don't agree with, or you would like to do some things differently, please leave a comment. I would love to engage in a conversation and get to know what are your process and how do you go through these things. And thank you so much once again. Please leave your comments below, subscribe to the channel, and ding the bell so you're notified when there's new content available, and stay tuned for more videos. Thank you so much, and don't forget to create, play, and record.